It's Thursday evening, February 25th, and we are going to spend a little time this evening with Psalm 109. And I have to tell you, Psalm 109 is a hard psalm. By hard, yeah, well, you'll soon find out what I mean by hard. It's what we would call an imprecatory psalm, and imprecatory would be prayers of petition, but often prayers um, asking God to do things, to bring judgment basically down on others. In this case, the psalmist is crying out to God about his enemies, his or her enemies, and asking God to do something about them, and asks God to do some not very nice things. I it's interesting because this is not a psalm that you will hear in church on a regular Sunday morning. This is a psalm that we, particularly the Christian church, were mostly silent about, probably because it has some really hard language, and we don't always know what to do with that. It makes us uncomfortable, I think, and we want to at least pretend that we're nicer than this. And so this is in some ways a harsh psalm. I would say perhaps a very real psalm. The psalmist does not mince words. At the same time, we have to remember the psalmist is not doing it themselves, but is asking God for this judgment, for this justice to be done. And one of the really interesting things as I was reading about this psalm and thinking about it was you can't tell based on the Hebrew exactly who is speaking. And so we have a psalmist in the first 5 verses that we know is speaking and saying, well, I'll just start it and read these first 5 verses. My God, and by the way, I'm going to read the psalm tonight, or we'll pray the psalm using the Message translation. And so it's a very loose translation, but at the same time, I think it's easier to follow along and listen as well, particularly for this one. So we begin. My God, don't turn a deaf ear to my Alleluia prayer. Liars are pouring out invective on me. Their lying tongues are like a pack of dogs out to get me, barking their hate, nipping my heels, and for no reason. I loved them, and now they slander me, yes, me, and treat my prayer like a crime. They return my good with evil, and they return my love with hate. And now the psalmist is going to go on and say to God, this is what I want you to do about it. These are these petitions. Here's what I want you to do, God. But what's really interesting is you can't tell in the Hebrew if it's actually the psalmist saying, this is what I want you to do, or if the psalmist is repeating what has been said to him. Do you hear the difference? And so is it the psalmist saying, I want you to do this? Or is the psalmist repeating what his or her enemies have said they are going to do to them? And one of the things I read said, think about it this way: if you have the victim of injustice and the perpetrator speaking at the same time, what would that sound like? And I just, that caught my ear, and I thought that was interesting, particularly when I think about just um, the level of discourse that's going on in our public square, in particular our political square these days, where we have members of both parties just accusing the other of horrible things and saying horrible things about each other just because they have a different political identity. I'm not telling you anything that you don't see and read and hear every day as well. And I just thought about what if a member of each political party stood side by side and said these things? How would we hear it differently? Is it me saying it? Is it somebody saying it about me? And would we be able to begin to hear one another? And would we be able to also turn to God and give it over to God, which ultimately is what the psalmist is doing? So I'm going to go on and we'll read at least some of these. This is a fairly long psalm, And so I'll read some of them and then we'll skip to the end as well and see what happens. So, send the evil one to accuse my accusing judge. Dispatch Satan to prosecute him. When he's judged, let the verdict be guilty, and when he prays, let his prayer turn to sin. Give him a short life. Give his job to somebody else. Make orphans of his children. Dress his wife in widow's black. Turn his children into begging street urchins, evicted from their homes, homeless. Like I said, not nice things that the psalmist is wishing for or that someone has said about the psalmist. May the bank foreclose and wipe him out, and strangers like vultures pick him clean. May there be no one around to help him out, no one willing to give his orphans a break. Chop down his family tree so that nobody even remembers his name. It goes on, and then it says, since he loved cursing so much, let curses rain down. Since he had no taste for blessing, let blessings flee far from him. And then finally the psalmist goes on and says, O God, my Lord, step in and work a miracle for me. And so now the psalmist has turned and said, but here's what I need. You can do it. Get me out of here. Remember, the psalmist has been oppressed by the enemy. Get me out of here. Your love is so great. I'm at the end of my rope, my life in ruins. I'm fading away to nothing, passing away. My youth gone, old before my time. I'm weak from hunger and can hardly stand up. My body a rack of skin and bones. I'm a joke in poor taste to those who see me. They take one look and shake their heads. Help me. Oh, help me, God, my God. Save me through your wonderful love. Then they'll know that your hand is in this, that you, God, have been at work. Let them curse all they want. You do the blessing. You do the blessing. Let them be jeered by the crowd when they stand up, followed by cheers for me, your servant. Dress my accusers in clothes dirty with shame, discarded and humiliating old rag-bag clothes. And is so often the case in the Psalms that we read and pray, the psalmist ends with praise for God. Despite all of this, despite the situation, despite the pleas for help, in all of this, we still remember who God is. And the psalmist prays, my mouth is full of great praise for God. I'm singing his alleluias surrounded by crowds, for he's always at hand to take the side of the needy and to rescue a life from the unjust judge. There is a lot of evil and hatred and injustice in this world, and what we do about that and how we respond to that and how we struggle with it is indeed a struggle. And I don't have answers, and I don't think that the psalmist had answers either, but I think more than anything what we hear is turning that to God as well and asking for God's intervention, God's wisdom to help us to do what we can do to make things right and to restore, right? To restore us, to reconcile us perhaps to one another, and to allow blessings to come where blessings should be. Like I said, it's a hard psalm, but it's a good one, I think, as well to wrestle with, particularly in the times in which we live, when we are so often each other's enemies, whether we see that or not. And so both to ask for justice where injustice is happening and also to ask for help for ourselves, I think, is important. And then finally, to give God thanks and praise. So may you wrestle a little bit with this psalm this evening, and then I will see you again Monday night. Have a good weekend.